I had somebody email me about that. She said, yeah, I'm really interested in the property. Can you work with us on the security deposit? And then I Googled her name and found a GoFundMe page on her and her explaining her situation that she had zero money.
Oh, jeez.
So I thought, well, that's not going to be, you're not going to be.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. We got an interesting episode, hopefully, for you here today. And that's because in our Facebook group, we had a landlord and they were just asking for help. They said they were having trouble filling one of their rentals. Her name is Stephanie. And I kind of reached out to Stephanie. I said, you know what? I think this would be an interesting podcast for some of our listeners to get the experience from somebody who's maybe having this trouble going through the rental process and see what they've learned from maybe some of the failures of that. And also see if there's any pointers that maybe me or Steve might be able to provide as well. So I just want to welcome Stephanie DeLeo to the podcast.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, and we were just saying before we started recording here that there's no shame in making mistakes as a landlord. We're certainly not on here to point out any, all the things that Stephanie might be doing wrong, because I'm sure there's plenty of things that you've learned and that you're doing right. But there's definitely some value in being cognitive of what you're doing and being aware of maybe some things that aren't working or some things that are working. And for landlords, that's really the only tried and true way of improvement over time is make these little mistakes, learn from them. And then when you deal with the next tenant, okay, I'm not going to do that again, or I'm not going to be flexible there. And like Eric was mentioning before we started recording, one of the things that he had a really hard time with at first was saying no to somebody. It's an awkward thing. It's an uncomfortable thing. So, and I swear to you, tenants sometimes have a sixth sense for that.
The first dog,
fresh meat. Yeah.
The first dog at my apartment, the person just put me on the spot and they just gave me this long story about how this dog was going to go homeless. Looking back, I know they made it all up.
Right.
And I was just my heart broke. And I was like, sure, you can get a husky in the apartment. Mm-hmm. Turns out that huskies shed very bad.
Yeah, for sure.
So Stephanie, enough of us talking. Could you give us a little bit of background story? Where are you from? How'd you get into managing this rental, and just kind of a little bit of history of the rental property that you're talking about?
Sure. This is a condo townhouse type of property that I actually bought on my own before I was married. Everybody was buying houses. It was the peak of the Florida real estate bubble. And I did not know that at the time, of course. So I bought at the peak of the market. And I lived in it for about 2 years. And then I got married. I moved in with my husband, and then we started renting the property out. And we were younger. We were in our late 20s. We were both working full time. We just weren't interested in managing it or doing anything with it. So right away we got a property manager, and we used a property manager for probably, almost 10 years to get somebody in, to get a tenant into the property. And then more than half of those years, we had the property management company actually manage it for us.
What drove the decision to discontinue the property manager and say, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to manage. I'm going to self-manage.
It was a relatively new house. I bought it brand new, and we weren't really having many issues with it. And then I just decided, all this property manager is doing is she's taking 10% of the rent every month. And if the tenant has a repair or some problem, all they do is call a repair person. And then I thought, well, I can, get on Angie's List, or I can Google, plumbers in the area, and I can find my own person. And so I figured I would just do that. And it worked fine. It worked great. And I'm a very responsive landlord. If my tenant calls me with a problem, I'm on it. And by the end of the day, I either have somebody there fixing it, or I'm very in touch with them because I care about how they're living and I want them to be comfortable. So it worked out well as far as that goes.
Has there been any moment of regret? Has there been anything that you've come across and you said, I wish we still had the management company to handle this?
Yeah, definitely the screening process, because that part was brand new to me. I didn't know what I was doing. I found your company and I decided to use your screening. And then I'd get the background report back, which was pretty self-explanatory. But then the credit report part is so hard. I was using Experian Connect, and they send me the credit report, and there's a glossary on there to kind of give you an idea of what the codes mean. but still, I still don't really totally understand how to read that. And there's so many things, like my credit report's awesome, but when you get some of these tenants and they've got a credit score of, 500, and you look at all the accounts they have and collections, it doesn't say collection on there. It says debt buyer. And I don't even know what that is. It's still confusing to me.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say actually in the Facebook group, because you brought up Experian Connect, somebody asked her, like, I just got a background or a credit report from Experian and I don't understand any of it. And I don't know if it was you, because this is a little bit back, but I reached out to them and told them to just like contact us so we can try to help them figure it out. Not that it's our product, but that was you. Did you end up actually reaching out to our screeners then via live chat?
Not that time. No, I guess that was probably a few days ago, and I had two more people come look at the house. And then I had this lady that finally did sign the lease, and she finally got back in touch with me. So it was just busy. I never actually called.
Well, you bring up a really great point. And let me just tell you, I've been looking at credit reports for close to 20 years now. I still see them on a daily basis. I still deal with, screeners that will come to me and say, hey, we came across something here. We don't know how to answer this question. You're not alone. Even for somebody, I would say, given my experience, I would consider myself an expert. I still run into almost daily something that I've never seen before or confuses me, or I have to reach out to one of the credit bureaus themselves directly to ask them, what is this? So you're not alone. I think credit reports are intentionally difficult to read. Some of the codes that they use and stuff, it almost feels, I've said this before out on the screening floor, it feels intentional. Like they could have made this easier and they chose not to. So that's sometimes I feel like that. So you're not alone there. It is not easy to read credit reports. I think for that reason, a lot of landlords, like to sort of use a summary approach, because you can really get lost in the weeds, right? You start going down that rabbit hole and trying to figure out what every single trade line means or what every single code means. And next thing you know, your head's spinning and you don't know if what you're looking at is good or bad, or should I consider this person? Is this terrible to rent to this person, or what am I doing? And it's probably some of what you felt was the overwhelm of just not really understanding or knowing what the report itself meant.
Yeah, well, on the first applicant I had, the first real applicant, I actually did reach out to Experian. I called them, and the guy who answered the phone had no idea. And I just thought, well, now I'm really in trouble, because if you can't tell me what it means and you work for the credit bureau, then how am I supposed to figure this out? Because it was one of those sob stories. The family really wanted to move to Florida and get a fresh start, and I was falling for it a little bit emotionally. I felt bad. They had kids, and my husband is the intellect of reason. He said, "Are you crazy? Why are you even considering these people?" I said,
right.
Well, so that I was really trying. That's why I called the credit bureau. I thought, well, maybe there's a better story. That they're actually not that bad if I can just figure it out. And
right.
We ended up rejecting them, but.
Yeah, and I think it's funny you mentioned that. I think a lot of times that's exactly what happens. Is if you're going into it with the mindset of I got to fill this place, and these are the people that have applied, and maybe you don't have a lot of applicants that you're able to choose from, so that the luxury of choice is sort of missing. Now you're trying to force a fit, right? You're trying to ultimately you're hoping that this person turns out to have great credit and everything works. And so when you're looking at that credit report through those lenses, sometimes it can get sort of foggy because you're looking at it from the perspective of, I want this person to have really good credit, so maybe this code means a good thing. And more often than not, it's usually not the case.
Well, and it's just shocking too to see these people's credit, because I don't know if I could live with a credit score of less than 500. I don't know how people manage themselves with that. And it's just very different. And in my mind, I kept hoping, I'll find a tenant that's just like me, that is clean and takes care of the house and has good credit and is responsible, and just getting to see all these backgrounds of people. It's very eye-opening.
Well, I think one of the tough things that I found from screening tenants, especially in the beginning, was I kind of started looking at people through my own lens and my own friendships and the kind of the people I hang out with. And not that I hang out with like the elitist of America or anything. But I'd be shocked kind of by some of the applicants I would be getting. I had a guy show up at my house. He seemed like he was still drunk, and it was like a 9 a.m. Showing. And I asked him what he did for a living, and he's like, "Oh, I closed the bar." Like he like cleaned up at this bar or something like that. And I was positive he was still drunk. And I'm just like, sitting here wondering, how could you possibly show up and think you're going to get a rental when you show up and you're still intoxicated? Right. But it's just like, I don't know. Every one of my friends understand that that's not a good idea. So they're not going to show up to someone's rental like that. But, there's different people out there, and, sometimes it's just paycheck to paycheck, and you try and figure out a way to make it work. And you definitely see that once you open up your rental property and start getting those applicants. I know Steve can speak to this because he's screening in his own way right now as we're trying to, we're growing and we're adding an extra screener to our staff, and he's got plenty of stories for that.
Screening whether you're screening for a new employee or a tenant, it's a difficult process because you're dealing with somebody that's on their best behavior, and they want to present an image that may or may not be true. And you don't know if what you're getting is total fallacy or if you're getting the truth. And that's a real hard thing to determine, and it's a hard thing to comfortably say, yeah, this guy's a good guy. And then you may find out really quickly that he just interviews really well. And tenants fall into that same category. Tenants, especially ones that have had problems in the past, evictions, problems with landlords, they get it. They know the game. And, Stephanie, to you, they might come to you and think, oh my God, fresh meat here. She's, she's newer. Yeah. She didn't ask this or that. And oh man, we got her, and I think a lot of times that's what tenants are looking for too. Because they they're opportunists that want to make sure that they're taking advantage of that opportunity. If they go to a large property, community or apartment community where they know that the screening is done very systematically, most of the time they're not even going to apply because they know they can't squeak through. So they target individual landlords. So it makes your job extra difficult. So you ended up rejecting those that had the less than 500 experience score, right?
Yes, that was our first couple who applied, and we did reject them. I felt terrible about it, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. How did they take the rejection?
Fine. I actually got a call from the husband, but and he left a message, but I don't think he realized that I had already sent the rejection. Mm-hmm. So after he probably talked to his wife, I never heard from them again. And I was surprised. I kind of expected them to call me again and try to convince me, because they were really trying to convince me, oh, our credit is, and they were forthcoming on the application. They said, you're going to see some bad credit here, but we had some bad times and we're getting better. But yeah, so we said goodbye to them. And then we didn't have any more interest for a while. Okay. Yeah.
So what happened with that, do you think? Did you ever sort of analyze and take a look and see what it was, maybe that a reason why you weren't getting the response that you were hoping from the listing ad or wherever you were trying to get interest in the apartment?
I think that might have been my first Facebook post on your group. And I got a lot of feedback that the price was too high. And I kind of knew, I listed it too high on purpose in the beginning, which was probably my first mistake, because I needed to get in there and do some repairs and spruce it up a little bit. And I knew I didn't have the time. So it was going to take me 6 weeks to do all that. I didn't want a lot of people looking at it. Which is probably opposite from what everybody else does. So I listed it too high. And then as I gradually started decreasing the price, and every time it kind of updated, then I added a virtual tour, because I had read that helps. But I don't even know if anybody ever saw it. So maybe that didn't do anything.
We saw it. We went through and looked. We were looking at your listing right now. So, and one of the things that we thought that you did a pretty good job was the pictures that you took, and sort of how how you're showing the place and how you have everything laid out. I think the only criticism that Eric had was some of the pictures maybe could have been a little clearer, right? Some of them were fuzzy.
Yeah, probably just a little bit of handshake on it. You just get a little bit of a blur.
But that's being real picky. Otherwise, I thought, I've seen some horrible showing pictures, and this one was actually pretty decent. Like,
well, all the photos you saw that were furnished were actually taken by the realtor when she listed it.
oh, now the truth comes out. All right, all right.
Well, I think I know what your realtor looks like because I'm not sure if it's you or her, but there's somebody in the one picture in the left-hand corner, long dark hair.
Oh, that's me. Oh
Yeah.
man, I'm in the picture. That's terrible.
Yeah,
Okay.
number 11, number 11 to 21.
But you could tell. I mean, one of the things that we've done some content and written some how-to articles and how to take pictures. And Eric, I would consider amateur photographer, right? You're pretty good with photography.
Yeah, I know how to get around a camera.
Yeah, lighting and things like that. And none of these pictures jump out at me. Like that was our first sort of approach when Eric and I thought about doing this podcast and saying like, hey, let's see if we can help her and sort of dissect what's going on and what's happening. First thing that we do is reach right immediately to the listing and see if we can pick that apart because we've seen some horrible examples of pictures that you should just never use. You know what I mean? Or pictures that you shouldn't take, or people take real bizarre angles and bad lighting, but yours seem to work pretty well. And so I think at that point, when you can dismiss that, it definitely comes down to price.
Yeah. Well, and then I found out too from Zillow is if you remove the listing and then you try to put it back on 3 days later, it won't come to the top because there's a 90-day counter on it. So if you put it back up in those 90 days, it's still going to be at the bottom. And so every day that went by, new listings popped up and mine got pushed all the way to the bottom. And I know from my experience looking at rentals, if I see something that's been on the market for 70 days, I wonder, well, what's wrong with that house? I'm not going to look at that one. So I don't know if that went through anybody's mind.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I was going to say, I think one thing so you're just talking specifically about Zillow, but Zillow kind of syndicates out to a bunch of different listing services. So right. I'm wondering if when you first posted at that higher price, that initially you just didn't get a lot of response, obviously, because of the price. But then when you started changing the price and making it lower on those other services that Zillow syndicated out to, you're probably already way down the feed and it didn't even matter because nobody was seeing that price now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did you, how about Craigslist? Did you try it at all on a listing on Craigslist? Or in some areas, some people just won't or don't. I don't know if you're in an area that it's just off the table or you don't want to deal with that.
I'm a little sketched out by Craigslist, mostly because I knew I would be handling it mostly. My husband works a lot and I just didn't want to be on the news,
I don't blame you. It's funny, we, what would you say, are probably 50-50. I mean, some landlords swear by it and say like that's the only way they get their place rented. Other landlords are in the same boat as you that say, I don't want to deal with Craigslist people. I think it's very geographical. I think it really a lot depends on where you are.
Yeah, we have property managers who manage properties in different states, and they say depending on the area, they will use Craigslist in this part of California, but they won't use it in Florida in this part. And it just seems to kind of be something about the locations where they get good applicants and then they don't in other places. Stephanie, did you try at all, like trying to find any kind of local Facebook groups or anything that you could post your property to?
I did look. I didn't find any local Jacksonville ones. I am on some military ones because we're a military family. And so I did post it on several military moving Facebook pages. And no, nothing, not even a comment, not even a like. It was just kind of got posted and then was forgotten about. So, but that, then again, that was at the higher price. So maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know.
Do you feel like you've gotten any traction at all since you dropped that price, or are you still kind of in a position right now where it's dead?
I think, and the other thing is that the Zestimate kept falling. So it kept fluctuating. And so long as my price was consistent with the Zestimate on Zillow, which I don't even know if that's accurate, but as long as that was relatively close, I was getting calls or emails. And actually in the very beginning when it was listed high, I did get several inquiries. I just didn't follow up on them because I fell into if I was the one looking and I wanted the house, I would reach out and call the phone number, or I would craft an email with proper grammar and, nice sentence and explain who I am. And it wouldn't just be the default message from Zillow. So I didn't follow up on them, but, and that I should have, that was a mistake. But yeah, certainly like it's listed now at $1,350. And since then, I've gotten I've had 3 separate showings aside from the lady that I ended up signing the lease with.
I was just wondering, like, do you have any kind of like pre-screening process, or is that something you've been kind of figuring out as you go, or how do you handle that when somebody reaches out and says they're interested?
Yeah, well, in the ad, it said, I had it originally written in regular letters, no smokers and no pets, but I'd still get inquiries. And then I'd say, well, do you smoke, or does anybody smoke who's going to live in the property? And do you have pets? And people would come back, yes, I have 2 dogs. So then I went back to the listing and I did it in all caps, no smokers, no pets. But so those are the 2 questions that I ask, because a lot of time people just don't read.
Yeah. Or they just don't. Yeah, I get that too. Where either they don't read or they don't care or think that you're going to make an exception once they talk to you. I don't know what the mentality is behind it, but yeah, you would think that it's a tripwire set to not waste everyone's time, but they somehow find a way to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I found too, like even just in this discussion with you, I'm trying to think of different conversations I've had, and I'm realizing I have 2 different email threads going on with 2 different women who are interested in reaching out and doing a podcast about going through the rental process. Because when I posted on your post my email and said, feel free to reach out, somebody else reached out too. So I'm getting kind of confused sometimes on some of the details. And I'm wondering if some of these renters too, if they apply to 30 different places, they may not have the listing up in front of them and not even remember, what was written in it. And also on the Zillow post, you don't see the no pets, no smokers unless somebody clicks more. So if there's somebody who's really just skimming photos and price, they're not going to see it.
Yeah. And I don't want to write that in the first sentence. I feel like it's too abrasive.
Yeah, it's still a sales process at the end of the day. I mean, you're still selling them on the idea of renting from there. So you have to make it attractive. And you hope by the time they get to that point, you've got the right person and everything clicks. But not always the case. Right now we're running ads like Eric had mentioned. We're hiring 2 new screeners actually. And we put right in the ad, you're working weekends, and I get somebody on a phone interview and casually mention like, oh yeah, and so you're okay with the weekend hours? And they're like, no, I'm not. I want to work Monday to Friday only. I'm like, wait a minute, you responded to the ad that specifically said weekend hours. So it's an endless battle, I think, of people either not paying attention or thinking, like I said, maybe they'll talk you out of it at some point. I don't know.
Stephanie, are you familiar with, because I know you're a member of our Facebook group, RentPrep for Landlords. Have you ever looked at the units section on the left-hand side if you're on a computer?
Yes, I've seen it.
There's a couple postings in there, and for anyone who's listening who might be interested, where it's like a poll and it says, what kind of showings do you do for your rental? And it had over probably close to 200 people chime in on it, but the comments are really good too. And one of the things that I picked up from it is people who will schedule them in 15-minute blocks on a Saturday, but they'll lump them together. So they said that it doesn't really take them more than 10, 15 minutes to go through the apartment. It kind of depends on the size of the apartment, but a lot of the people will just schedule it in a block of time to kind of save themselves from having to drive over there 3-4 times in 1 week. And one of the people on there too, they said it really just depends on the property. So if you think it can work well for your property, you can do it. But if it's I don't know what necessarily is the factors that makes them decide what's a good one. But I think for that person, they said a single family, they do individual showings. In apartments, they do them as open showings for some reason. So
when you've narrowed it down, you've got the applicant that you ended up choosing, and she signed, right?
Yes, she signed last night.
Did you end up running more background checks and applicants through, or was she the only one that you ran and she came back good?
So I ran her at the beginning of last week. I ran her background check and her credit report. And then her credit report came back, and she had mentioned on the application, you're going to see some things on the credit report. Let me explain to you what happened to me. And she goes through this whole thing about a car accident and that, she wasn't getting the right payment from the person who hit her and, et cetera. So I did see those things on the credit report, and then I had questions, and I tried to get in touch with her, and she would not respond to me. And then I had another party contact me, and they wanted to see the house. So I showed them the house, and that was a sketchy situation because it was a couple with their 8-year-old son, and then they had their boss. He had his boss show up also. And the family was from Brazil. And this is another thing. I just wasn't expecting so many international applicants who didn't have I couldn't run a background check on them because and that was another Facebook post that I did. So they showed up and the boss was pretty pushy. And I felt pretty uncomfortable with that situation.
Was he there to like speak on their behalf as like an interpreter, or what was the point of him being there?
That, and also to sort of vouch for them because the guy who wanted to rent the house, he had been apparently working for this man for a few months, and this boss, he kind of knew this guy from when he was a little kid, so he was trying to help them by bringing them over to the United States from Brazil, trying to set them up, and he was kind of running the show. I mean, he's like, yeah, we're going to take this place, let's fill out the application. I don't think the family was overly thrilled. I think they liked the house, but they were just kind of doing what the boss said.
Right.
And then right off the bat, the boss, because he claims that he owns a tile company, and he right off said, hey, I'm gonna, would you mind if I replace the carpet down here with hardwood floors, and maybe we'll put in a backsplash in the kitchen, and no cost to you. It's just become more comfortable for them to live this way. And I was like, okay, that sounds awesome. But then, of course, the other part of me said, well, this is probably too good to be true. And I Googled the boss, and I couldn't find a website for his company. And he's been in business for 15 years. And that was a flag to me. But I ran the boss's background check, and I sent him the link for the credit check, and he never responded. And then finally, the woman finally responded to me, the one that I ended up signing the lease with. She responded. So then I kind of was able to get out of this Brazilian family. I was able to say, look, my other applicant, she applied before you, so I'm going to go with her. So that was good, because I was kind of in a situation that I didn't know what to say, because they had already applied. And I thought, well, how do I get out of this? I just don't feel comfortable with this situation. Something's not right.
Yeah. And, with you brought up a good point with the Brazilian family. And something that we talk about here a lot on the podcast too, is really the best formula for screening is 2 parts data and 1 part gut feeling. And you can't put too much emphasis on the gut feeling, but you also can't completely discount it either. And if somebody comes back clear, on the background check, but you just have a horrible gut feeling that something's going to go wrong. And it's funny, in your situation, you were looking at it as somewhat favorable that this guy was willing to do all this work. I've definitely talked to a lot of landlords that have had horrible situations where a quote electrician or handyman or whoever rents from them and then decides he's going to remodel the apartment without permission or whatever. So I've seen those situations turn bad pretty quickly too. And at first it seems like, oh, this is great. This guy will be able to take care of the property and maybe do some updates and things like that, until it's not great anymore. But really at the end of the day, it comes down to that gut feeling that you had, that something was pulling at you, telling you, something's not right, or something seems weird. And I think a lot of landlords, have a hard time finding that comfort zone of when and where to listen to that sort of inner voice of yours.
Right. And I had another family too. I just showed it to on Monday. What day is today? Today is Thursday. Mm-hmm. So it was Monday, I think. And they were super nice. I mean, just a really great family. I had a nice connection with them. I felt my gut feeling was totally different from with the Brazilian couple and their boss. I really felt like they really liked the property and that they would take care of it. And, but I was already in talks with this other lady, but they were international too. He said, I'll tell you right now, we're moving from Australia. My wife is a citizen. You'll find a background on her, but you're going to have a hard time finding it from me. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay, well, maybe that's a good thing. Well, I don't know.
So here's the rule of thumb in the screening industry for dealing with international. Just for anyone listening that might be curious about it too, or in your situation, since it seems to be something that might come up again for you in the future. Usually the rule of thumb is if they've been in the country for 6 months, you can run a U.S. search on them. Expect it to be pretty boring. But you'll at least be able to find some records in there that they exist, right? The problem with running international background searches is they get expensive very, very fast. Australia, I don't know off the top of my head, but I want to say it's well in the $200 range for like civil records, judgment records, financial type records, to be able to pull that from Australia. And the problem is every country has their own what they call country access fee. And so you pay that even we pay those prices. It's not like we get discounts because we're a background check company. So it can get really expensive, and then you're in a weird position. So what do? Do you run a Brazilian background search on these people, or do you trust the U.S. search, even though they're going to have very, very limited records here? So it puts you in an awkward spot, right?
Now the U.S. search, how do you run that?
So you don't need a social security number. Matter of fact, quite often we're given the wrong social security number on an applicant, whether it be intentional or unintentional. I'm sure it's a mixture of both. So we don't necessarily need a social security number, and somebody doesn't need a social security number or be a U.S. citizen to start showing up into database records. It's just a matter of historical record. When have they been reported there? Have they ever had an issue with law enforcement? If they've gotten a citation or a ticket or arrested, those are going to all show up as records. Financial records. Has a landlord ever had to sue them for not paying rent or evict them? You don't have to be a U.S. citizen to be evicted or to get sued. So those are all records that will potentially show without a social security number if it happened to them. If it didn't happen to them, it's going to be a very boring report that basically says there's nothing to show because nothing happened. But usually 6 months is the rule of thumb, that if somebody's been here for 6 months, they're going to start showing up in the database. So on the applicant that you ended up going with, did she give you any feedback or resistance on the security deposit or anything like that?
Not really. Just the initial trying to nail down a time for me to meet with her. She wasn't really responding to that. And I finally got her to respond, and she said, well, I'm not. I said, I think it was sent on Monday. I sent her the lease in an email, and I said, I can meet with you Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday night to do this. And then finally the next day she said, well, I can't do it until Wednesday because I'm out of town. And then Wednesday I kind of connected with her, and she just wouldn't tell me a time. Like, she said, well, let me call you back. And then she never called me back. And so I said, I'm not going to wait for her to tell me what time she can meet. I'm going to tell her, look, I can meet you at 6 or 6:30. And if that doesn't work, send it to me electronically. Or else I have this other family that really wants to rent the house. And that worked. She got back to me real quick.
Good. And has she already given you the security deposit, or you haven't collected that yet?
Yes, she gave it to me last night.
Gotcha. A personal check or a money order?
It was a personal check. I was going to deposit it real quick and see if it bounced. Hopefully it's fine.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's usually a telltale sign. If that bounces, you got problems immediately. And usually that means if they're not prepared to move, there's a chance that there's a good reason that they're moving in haste. They're trying to leave a bad situation. Maybe they're about to get evicted or something like that. People who are prepared and well prepared have that money saved. They know how to put it aside. They're ready to pay that security deposit. It's not an issue. They don't try to negotiate. We hear that a lot about applicants who will try to negotiate the security deposit and say, well, let me give you half this month and half the next month or whatever. It's usually that's a deal breaker right there. So
I had somebody email me about that. She said, yeah, I'm really interested in the property. Can you work with us on the security deposit? And then I Googled her name and found a GoFundMe page on her, and her explaining her situation, that she had zero money.
Oh, geez.
So I thought, well, that's not going to be, you're not going to be
I don't know, not to get too much into the weeds on that, but was it just a GoFundMe page just saying I need some money?
Well, I mean, she had it seemed like she had some serious medical problems. And then she moved in with her sister, and her sister's house caught on fire. I mean, it was just, all this stuff. She needed money to get her medicine to basically be able to live. And I thought, well, how are you going to pay the rent if you can't? I mean, I hate to sound mean.
No,
but
that's not mean. It's not mean. You're protecting yourselves. We had an employee a long time ago. This is going way, way back. We had an employee that this guy would show up late, and he'd have every excuse in the book, and he wouldn't show up for a shift or whatever the case was. And I'll never forget, my business partner at the time had said to him, you're either lying to me or you're the most unlucky person I've ever met. And either one, I don't want you working for me. So I think in cases like that, either if it's true, there's a black cloud that's following them, or they're not being honest about something, But no, I don't think. Listen, as a landlord, you have a responsibility to your tenants, but you still have to be very selective about which tenants you're going to have that responsibility to. So I think landlords get themselves into trouble when you try to have that huge heart in the application process or the screening process, because you're going to end up letting somebody through that's going to take advantage of you. It's different if you're renting from them and you got a history with them, and if you want to do them a favor or something like that, and that's your opportunity to have a heart. But a total stranger that you don't know, unfortunately, more often than not, I think they're trying to take advantage, unfortunately.
I'll remember that for next time.
Yeah. The one thing that kind of stood out from what you were saying just a little bit ago was that you were having trouble getting your current, or this person who's going to be renting from you, to pay the security deposit. And then, you didn't really threaten. You just told them the truth that you had somebody else who was interested. And then all of a sudden they turned around and had the security deposit right away. So to me, that tells me that person responds to a stimulus. So I would definitely make sure, if you are, worried potentially about paying rent on time and those type of things, that you do have some sort of late policy if they're late on rent, because it sounds like this is somebody who responds to a stimulus. So if they know they're going to get that, whatever you decide, the amount to be if they're late on rent. But that can kind of solve a lot of issues too, just to make sure you got the right systems in place and that you actually enforce them too.
That's a great point, especially when you're dealing with somebody with less than perfect credit. She already lives on a system of prioritizing. If it becomes apparent that she can pay the rent late and not be penalized for it, believe me, your rent will be paid late consistently, and other things will be paid ahead of it, because in her system of prioritizing, it really does come down to which one is most important. So if the best advice I think I can give you at this point would be, make sure she understands the late fee policy that you have or that's on the lease, and then stick to it. Don't let her slide, even if it happens one time, or, you know what I mean? If she calls, I would say, no, we can't. We have to have, we have to do it this way, where we have to charge you this late fee, because if that becomes flexible, then you're opening up yourself for problems down the road.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. So in my lease, it says the rent is due no later than the third business day of the month. So it's due on the first, but it's not late until after the third day. And so she was reading it and she said, oh, it's the third day of the month. Oh, my current one is the fifth day of the month. So right away I thought, okay, so you're one of these people that doesn't pay by the first of the month.
Right. Which may be the case. Yeah, the first inkling that she's going to pay late, or call you and give you an explanation of why she's paying late, and basically trying to ask if you're willing to waive the fees, I would, that's going to be a tough position to be in if you're not the type of person that's comfortable saying no. But I would be really, really strict on that and not be flexible, and let her know this is a legal arrangement that you have and you're not willing to bend on it. And I know a lot of landlords sort of put that responsibility on someone else if they don't want to bear that load themselves. So you might say something like, we're managing the property and the owners would never go for that. We can't let a late payment slide or pass on one, or, I'm working with a broker and they're taking a look at all the payment history and I can't allow that. So if you have to shift the blame a little bit so you're not necessarily the bad guy in that situation, fine. I think some landlords do that pretty successfully, but just don't bend. Don't be flexible on that, because that, to me, is where landlords get into trouble. And you're right. The fact that she brought that up, that would tell me too that it may be in her mind she knows now that she's got to pay by the third, and so she's not going to be a renter that pays on the first consistently.
Well, Stephanie, I think this has been really great having you on the podcast and just kind of getting your insights. And it's funny, as you've been talking your way through this, I realize I've read every single one of your posts in the Facebook group, because I'm like, oh, she's the one that was going to have the tile work done. And people are like, that sounds like a bad idea. And then I remember the Social Security and all the other stuff. So you've definitely been active in the group, because everything was kind of stitching together for me as you're telling your story here. So that was pretty cool.
I could not have done this without that Facebook group, to be honest with you. So it was wonderful.
That's awesome feedback. Thank you for that. And thank you for being a guest in our podcast. And hopefully, we can help you out in the future too.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.